So it's an education process, right? It's inherent upon us to educate the public as to what those pressures are. And, we only have a limited amount of money. And that's one thing I'm hoping to see in this budget address is that the governor, first of all, comes up with a realistic revenue number as we move forward into next year. What is that number? Last year, we, through COGFA and through the House and the Senate and the governors, there was a $2 billion difference in that revenue number.
I think there's also ongoing challenges that they have to acknowledge and figure out how we're going to actually address that. I'm certainly hoping we actually see that. Pension payments are going to propose to go up at least probably about $1 billion, and Medicaid spending, unless we make some changes, that's been growing at about 5% per year, and the way we'll be starting off the year at $1.8 billion in the hole. So we have a lot of catch up to do too, and how we're actually going to keep the Medicaid program as well as our pension solvent.
I think people need to realize how these cost pressures that we have on the budget, whether it be Medicaid or pension funding issues, the cost pressures or group health costs, what it places on the budget. And it limits our capacity to fund and invest in programs that, whether it be education and human services or healthcare or even infrastructure or transportation. So I think it's real important for the people to understand what these challenges are. And you rightly point that out on the Medicaid and these other liabilities side, that we need to address them.
And figure out how we can do so that it's not all balanced on the backs of our neediest residents in Illinois, to protect sort of what our priorities are, making sure we are maintaining a safety net as well. And that's going to be a challenge given all of the pressures we've got. I think last year it sort of happened that there hadn't been a real collaborative process, I think, between both chambers. Ended up having some cuts in there that were very problematic and didn't give enough time to really plan for it, such as closing a lot of state facilities without the time and the resources to plan for that and make sure that folks had places to go. I'm hoping we can all work together up front this time and sort of prevent some of those problems from occurring in the budget in the first place. It's hard for for all of our community-based organizations to plan when they don't get the appropriate budgets up front and keep expecting that things are going to change down the road. I hear it a lot from my human service agencies that they have a really hard time planning, and we've been seeing bankruptcies as a result.
And the fact is, we made really tough decisions last year in our budget. We made cuts in contract line items. We made cuts in personnel line items. We reduced spending significantly from the year before. I mean, we've taken some
probably the first time in decades.
First time in decades, absolutely. But we opened up every single contract over a certain amount of money for competitive bidding at the point of renewal, and that's going to impact $8 billion worth of state contracts.
I think one of the challenges we're still facing in the budget, too, is the amount of unpaid bills that are out there. I know you've really been working on this, Leader Sullivan, and I think I'm hoping that we see in the budget address by the governor some plan to address that and really bring that down.
And Heather, that's the key to it, a plan. Really right now, the only option is the proposal that I have out there is to go out and sell some bonds and restructure that debt and pay it off over 4 or 5 years. Nobody else has any other viable options out there. So I've been trying to reach across the aisle to gain support on that legislation. I'm going to continue to do that. I'd love to see it a part of the governor's budget address. Well, I think it's going to be interesting to see for, Dan, you've worked on this budgeting for results. I mean, that's been your initiative. I think it's going to be interesting to see this year. This is the first year we're going to be able to compare, right?
Yeah.
So we have what was budgeted last year. Now let's see what the results are. You have to come in as an agency, an organization, and say, okay, here's what we gave you last year. Mm-hmm. What did the state see in return for that?
Exactly.
And that's going to be I think that's going to be exciting as we gather that data this year and over the next several years.
I'm also hopeful. I think the governor at least starting off on a little bit different tone than he had last year. I know he recently has been coming out and saying we need to do, for example, a goal of $2 billion cost containment in the Medicaid program. That wasn't sort of a tone I think we've been seeing before. I'm hopeful. I think we need to see the details in the budget and how we might accomplish that, but I'm hopeful that there's a little bit different tone getting set and might help us all play together
Heather,
and really
I agree.
Be problem solvers.
I agree. I think that the rhetoric coming from the governor over the last several weeks has been very different from what we saw last year. So I'm hopeful. I think we're going to see a realistic budget.